Religion in ancient cities was never just private belief. It was policy, property, and performance, a system that turned gods into institutions and temples into economic engines. Today we'll open the temple books, read inscriptions, and follow the money to reveal how state cults actually ran ancient cities. What if belief didn't matter at all? In many ancient state cults, personal faith was a secondary concern. The key expectation was participation. Ritual compliance, not inner conviction, was the glue that held the social fabric together. The state cared about what you did, not what you thought. This distinction is fundamental to understanding the ancient world, where religion and governance were two sides of the same coin. Why keep gold in a sacred place? In the Greek and Near Eastern worlds, temples weren't just for worship. They often functioned as state banks. The Parthenon in Athens, for example, housed the treasury of the Delian League. These sacred vaults safeguarded public wealth, underwrote military campaigns, and served as a financial backbone for the entire city-state. Placing wealth under divine protection added a layer of security that no mortal guard could match, making the temple a center of both spiritual and economic power. Whoever led the ritual led the city. In ancient societies, political legitimacy was frequently demonstrated through religious performance. A Roman magistrate or an Egyptian pharaoh proved their right to rule not by debating theology, but by successfully carrying out state sacrifices. These rituals were public affirmations of their authority, showing the populace that they were the designated intermediaries between the community and the gods. Failure to perform them correctly could be seen as a sign of divine disfavor and a direct threat to their leadership. Priests weren't separate from politics. They were deeply embedded within it. In Roman Greece, priesthoods were not lifelong spiritual callings but public offices, often held by the same elite men who pursued political and military careers. A man could serve as a general one year and a high priest the next. This fusion of roles ensured that religious policy was always aligned with the interests of the state, as the ruling class controlled both spheres of influence. Was emperor worship really about gods? Not entirely. For the subjects of the Roman Empire, making an offering to the emperor's genius, or divine spirit, was less an act of theological belief and more a declaration of political allegiance. It was a standardized loyalty test, a way to signal obedience and integration into the Roman system. Refusing this act was not seen as heresy but as sedition, a rejection of Roman authority itself. Skipping a sacrifice could be dangerous. Public refusal to participate in state rites was interpreted as a direct threat to social order. When early Christians, for instance, declined to honor the Roman gods, it was viewed not as a matter of personal conscience, but as an act of subversion. By abstaining, they were seen as rejecting the community and undermining the Pax Deorum, the peace of the gods, which was believed to guarantee the state's stability and prosperity. This made their refusal a matter of treason. Ancient gods cared more about cities than people. While individuals certainly had personal relationships with deities, state cults were overwhelmingly focused on collective well-being. The gods were petitioned for the safety of the entire community, victory in battle, abundant harvests, and protection from plagues or natural disasters. The concept of personal salvation in an afterlife was not the primary concern of state-sponsored religion. Its purpose was to secure the here and now for the collective. Every offering told a story. Votive dedications in temples were rarely anonymous acts of piety. They were public statements, carefully crafted to display the donor's wealth, loyalty, and social status. Inscriptions often named the donor, their family, and the reason for the gift, ensuring their generosity was visible to all who entered the sacred space. These offerings were as much about social maneuvering as they were about divine appeasement, turning the temple into a gallery of civic ambition. Improvisation was dangerous. State rituals were not spontaneous outpourings of emotion. They were highly standardized procedures that followed strict ancient formulas. Every word, gesture, and element had to be perfect. A mistake in the recitation of a prayer or an imperfection in a sacrificial animal was considered a serious omen. Such errors were believed to anger the gods and nullify the ritual's effectiveness, potentially endangering the entire state. If a mistake was made, the entire ceremony often had to be repeated from the beginning. Who stood where mattered. Religious processions and public sacrifices were meticulously choreographed events that visually reinforced the social hierarchy. The position one held in a procession, proximity to the altar, and the role one played in the ceremony were all determined by class, gender, and political rank. Priests and magistrates were at the front, followed by nobles, citizens, and finally non-citizens or slaves at the periphery. These events made the social order visible and tangible, reaffirming everyone's place within the state. Religion was an industry. Large temple complexes, like the one at Delphi or the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, were massive economic engines that employed thousands. They required a vast workforce of artisans to create statues and offerings, laborers to construct and maintain buildings, administrators to manage finances, and priests to conduct rituals. These sanctuaries were not just spiritual centers. They were sprawling enterprises that drove local economies and functioned like corporations. Each god had a job. The pantheons of state cults were often organized like a divine bureaucracy, with each deity holding a specific jurisdiction that mirrored the functions of government. There was a god for war, a goddess for justice, a god of commerce, and a deity overseeing agriculture. This divine division of labor allowed the state to direct its petitions to the appropriate celestial authority, treating the pantheon as a supernatural cabinet responsible for the various departments of civic life. You couldn't just worship anyone. While private worship of foreign deities existed, for a new cult to be practiced publicly, it often required state authorization. In Rome, the introduction of a new god, like Cybele, was a formal process overseen by the Senate. This vetting process ensured that new religious practices were compatible with Roman values and did not threaten public order. The state acted as a gatekeeper, deciding which gods were officially welcome within the city's sacred boundaries. Lost the war? Blame the sacrifice. When a state suffered a major catastrophe, such as a military defeat or a famine, the cause was frequently attributed to ritual error rather than poor strategy or natural phenomena. Leaders and priests would scrutinize recent ceremonies for any flaw, a misspoken word, a bad omen ignored, an impure offering. This explanation, known as vitium in Latin, shifted the blame from human incompetence to a breakdown in the relationship with the divine, which could then be rectified through corrective rituals. Policy decisions came from prophecy. Before embarking on major state endeavors, leaders regularly consulted oracles. The Oracle of Apollo at Delphi was perhaps the most famous, advising Greek city-states on everything from declarations of war and colonization efforts to the drafting of laws. These prophecies were not taken lightly. They were considered divine guidance that could shape the course of history. The oracle's pronouncements provided a sacred sanction for political decisions, making them difficult to challenge. The state decided when life paused. The religious calendar was the master clock of ancient society. It was the state that determined the schedule of festivals, sacred days, and periods of ritual significance. These religious observances dictated the rhythm of life, regulating when assemblies could meet, when courts could convene, when armies could march, and when the general populace should cease work for celebration or worship. Time itself was structured by the sacred obligations of the state. No one asked what you believed. They only cared if you participated. The modern emphasis on inner faith and personal belief was largely absent from ancient state cults. Orthopraxy, or correct action, was valued far more than orthodoxy, correct belief. The state required outward observance, attending festivals, making sacrifices, and honoring the gods of the city. What a person privately thought about those gods was their own business and considered irrelevant to their duties as a citizen. Different people, same ritual. For states and empires encompassing diverse populations, shared religious ceremonies were a powerful tool for unification. From the Panathenaic procession in Athens to the imperial cult in Rome, these rituals brought together people of different backgrounds and social classes under a common civic identity. By participating in the same rites, they affirmed their membership in the collective and their loyalty to the state that sponsored them. Religion happened in the open. Unlike many modern forms of worship that take place inside private buildings, ancient state sacrifices were public spectacles. They were performed outdoors in front of the temple, with large crowds in attendance. The sights, sounds, and even smells of the ritual, the procession, the prayers, the slaughter of the animal, and the cooking of the meat were meant to be experienced by the community. Religion was a communal, sensory event designed to be seen, heard, and remembered by all. Ultimately, religion was a technology of control. Beyond any individual's spiritual needs, state cults existed to preserve social and political order. They legitimized rulers, reinforced hierarchies, unified diverse populations, and provided a framework for understanding success and failure. By managing the relationship between the human and divine realms, the state maintained stability, hierarchy, and continuity. Above all, state cults were a system designed to keep the world in its proper, ordered place. State cults were more than prayer. They were instruments of governance. Temples loaned money, fed citizens, shaped identity, and made rulers legible. Knowing how religion and power intertwined helps us see the ancient world clearly, and reminds us that public ritual has always been political. If you want more evidence-first history, subscribe and request sources in the comments.